And this week, our lessons are full of a couple of other call stories. So I just want to think about that idea for a second this morning. We think of call stories as sort of the ways that God is inviting us or welcoming us into serving God, serving Jesus, serving each other. It's the ways where our skills can sort of meet the needs of the world, as we'll talk about in a little bit. So Jesus and God sort of paved the way for this, equipping us with skills, with the knowledge we need. So as I was thinking about this gospel lesson, I was thinking about how in my own life, my own sort of like personal call journey, each sort of parts of this sort of ring true for me. And I wonder if they ring true for you as well. So if we start out looking at the gospel, Jesus is with a crowd, and they're on the shores of the Lake Gennesaret, which is the Sea of Galilee. That's the local name for the Sea of Galilee. So he's still in that region preaching, teaching, healing. A crowd has followed him because they've heard about him. And he decides that they're too close. I totally get this. There's too many people. He needs to back away. So he hops into a boat and goes out just a little bit from shore where he can preach from shore. And picture sort of a Finger Lake. The Sea of Galilee looks a lot like a Finger Lake. So if you're sort of out just a little bit from shore on a Finger Lake, and you can project, which we talked on Thursday, Jesus probably could project very well considering the places he preached. Being out on the lake probably would have worked for him because there's lots of space and mountains to bounce sound off of, and it probably would have worked. So he talks to these fishermen and he says to them, put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch. And I think that's one sort of aspect of call story, is that we are asked to go out into the deep. We're asked to go out of our comfort zone, to go into this uncharted territory, because we have no idea, once we say yes, where this will take us. So think about Jeremiah, think about Isaiah. This is a call story for him this morning as well. And God says to him, go and tell these people who aren't hearing and aren't listening and aren't seeing all of these things. So perhaps also think about Mary, where she says yes to God. She has no idea. She has maybe a little bit of an inkling, but she really has no idea where it's going to take her. So I think one part of call stories, one part of being called, is that you have to go out of your comfort zone. For it to really work, you have to go out of your comfort zone. So as I think about my own life, I was teaching pretty happily, was pretty thrilled with what I was doing. And then discerned a call, and I was like, okay, well, that means I'm not going to be teaching, and I'm going back to school for 3 years, and I'm not going to have a job, and all of the things that you think of when all of a sudden God is like, here, do this instead. So that's one just sort of piece of that. So then Simon says to him, Master, we've worked all night long and have caught nothing. But if you say so, we'll let down the nets. So if you think about a time in your life where it just isn't going well, you've been trying and nothing's happening, or you've tried over and over and there's still no results. Imagine Jesus coming along and saying, do it one more time. Why? Don't want to. So the disciples, if you think about sort of who they are, they're fishermen from little humble towns in Galilee. Most of them have probably never traveled outside that region. They've never traveled to Jerusalem. They've never traveled anywhere besides their little fishing communities. They don't know how to preach. They don't know how to teach. They don't know how to heal anybody. They don't really have the skills that you would expect Jesus to be looking for in his followers. But yet, these are the people Jesus calls. These are the people who Jesus says, come with me. And they do. So there's something about this Jesus, this charismatic person who's gone all throughout the region, that they trust him already, that there's something to what he's saying, that they realize, well, maybe we should listen. So then we get to Simon Peter. And Simon Peter is one of the disciples that we follow throughout Jesus' life, or Jesus' ministry, rather. And Peter sees this abundance, right? So they catch all of these fish. There's this amazing result of something that hadn't been working for them for the past 6 hours. And all of a sudden, Simon is like, I can't do this. He says, go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. Kind of like Isaiah is saying, I'm a man of unclean lips and of unclean people. So oftentimes when there's a call involved, we feel wholly unprepared. We feel really not ready, and we feel like we lack the skills that are necessary to really do what Jesus is asking us to do. So I love that Simon Peter says to him, nope, I'm out. Or I want to be out, I guess, rather. He isn't actually out. So they're all amazed, and they just sort of see this happening, this unfolding in front of them. And it makes me curious, sort of what happens when we take that step. So the disciples trust Jesus enough to put their nets out again, and this abundance is what they see. They're amazed at what is going on in front of them. So this faith and this courage that they exhibit has this result that they can see, this tangible sort of like, oh, there's something going on here. So one of the other sort of things about call stories is this objection, right, that Simon Peter says. And then the follow-up to that is always some version of, do not be afraid. Again, think of Mary, think of Jeremiah last week. God says, I will be with you. He says something similar to Isaiah, just not as easily discerned, possibly. So Jesus says to Simon, do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people. When they brought their boats to shore, they left everything and followed him. So that's a pretty amazing sort of statement if you think about it. These are fishermen whose lives, their families, their towns, all depend on what they do. So they go out every day, they bring in fish from the Sea of Galilee, they sell it in the markets, they do whatever they need to do, and then they do it again. And that was their livelihood. That's what they did. So the fact that they just up and leave everything is pretty incredible. For a lot of reasons, just the fact that they had the faith and the courage to do that, again, just sort of leaving everything behind, takes a lot of courage. And they are called, they have this sense that like there is something more going on here, and they answer that. So their priorities change, their focus shifts. Was clearly the case for me as I transitioned from being a teacher to being a full-time student again. Your priorities have to shift as you're answering a call, because the things that you were doing before aren't necessarily the best way that you can be living into what God is asking you or calling you to do. Fear, I think, inevitably sort of accompanies this experience, right? Anytime that you're changing something really dramatically, I think fear is always part of the equation. Even though God says, do not be afraid, it's still there. But I think the promise is that it's not that we won't be afraid. It's not that it won't be hard, but it's that God is with us the whole time. And that's just, for me, what sort of gets me through those really rough days, is that like God is still here. Might not feel like it, might not seem like it all the time, but God is still here guiding us in ways that we oftentimes don't even realize. So Frederick Buechner is one of my favorite theologians, and he says, the place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet. So the places that bring you joy, the places that bring you gladness, you can take those gifts that you've been given, the places where you've been called and you have the skills to be, and you can mesh those or align those with the world and what the world needs. That is where you are called to be. And as I think about this, the world seems like a really big, that's a big concept, but I think it even works on sort of a smaller scale. So within your own family, within your own community, here at Zion on this annual meeting Sunday, we have so many people who are called to be in this place in this time for the plethora of skills that we all have, right? So where your deep gladness or the things that bring you joy meet with what the world needs in this time and place, that's where you're called for right now. Calls change, calls evolve. And I think for God, it's not so much about ability, because as we talked about, those disciples didn't really have the abilities that you would expect, but they're available, right? They are willing to show up. And I think that's a huge part of being called, is just being willing to show up. So on this annual meeting Sunday, call for me, I think for probably many of us, always, maybe not always, but very often and in the best ways, comes in community. So it comes where the places and the people you love can sort of hold you up and support you and say, nope, this is exactly what you should be doing, which is what I heard for 8 years until I actually went to seminary. So once that happens, once you have that sort of affirmation, then you really can sort of really live into that call, that place where your joy and your gladness meet the world's hunger and do something with it. Amen.